Thanks so much, Jason. It's good to be here with everyone. And once again, I want to thank the Pacific Salmon Foundation and the Rivershed Society for hosting this event. And when I look at the diversity of groups represented together in this workshop, that makes this a really important day, a really important meeting for the heart of the Fraser, in that this hasn't happened before. So it's a big day for the river, a river that's close to the heart of all of us. So thank you all for participating. Now, as the day goes on, I'm sure there'll be lots of good discussion and perhaps some varying perspectives. But the goal of the day is simply to try and find a common foundation, to seek out shared values, to talk about how we can map a path forward. Now, I think probably all of us have special stories about the heart of the Fraser, and mine goes way back to 1975. I had spent much of that summer paddling the full length of the Fraser. We had this great adventure, and towards the end of our trip, I was in the town of Hope, and I was thinking about finally getting home, a warm bed. But when we jumped back into our boats and headed west, I was taken aback by the beauty of the river that we'd see over the next 90 kilometers. The forested banks, the lush back eddies, the numerous islands, and the extensive gravel bars. It was an amazing, diverse, and stunningly beautiful part of the river, as you all know. I also realized it was a section of the river that many in the lower mainland never really get to see, and that once you cross the Port Mann Bridge on the highway, you don't really see the river again till you get pretty much all the way to Hope. But back in 1975, I could clearly see just how special and just how productive this part of the river was, and I've been drawn back to it ever since. In more recent decades, the area ultimately became recognized as one of the most productive stretches of river anywhere on Earth, and it has since become known as the heart of the Fraser. Now, this stretch supports close to 30 species of fish. It sustains our largest run of spawning salmon, and that's the massive number of pink salmon that spawn in the main stem every 2 years. It sustains our largest concentration of white sturgeon, along with critical spawning habitat. And its importance as both a migration corridor and rearing habitat for salmon is unquestioned. And as Mike Pearson will mention, even the islands themselves become fish habitat during high flows when young salmon in huge numbers move on to the wetted parts of the island seeking refuge from fast-moving water. Now, in addition to fish, the heart of the Fraser also has amongst the most important cultural values and cultural sites in our country. As Murray touched on. And as you've heard a couple of times, there are 19 nations represented within the heart of the Fraser stretch. The area also has immense recreational values. As an example, we've all seen those images of gravel bars packed with anglers when a salmon fishery is underway. And then there are boaters and nature enthusiasts and hikers and sturgeon fishers. And as a kayaker and canoeist, I regularly share the river with many other paddlers. Also, for anyone who spends time on the river, you can't help but appreciate the immense wildlife values that exist there. Whether that be birds such as eagles, herons, turkey vultures, and sandhill cranes, among many others, or amphibians ranging from Oregon spotted frogs to redback salamanders, or other species such as beavers, bear, deer, cougar, coyotes, to name just a few. The bottom line is that all of this extraordinary abundance, both fish and wildlife, has sustained First Nations for thousands of years. And today it provides exceptional cultural, recreational, aesthetic, and economic values for all those who live in southwestern BC. And all of this is made possible by the wild, rambling nature of this stretch of the Fraser. Yet despite its incredible values, the heart of the Fraser has been hard hit by things like extensive land clearing, agricultural expansion, urbanization, and industrial development. And the negative impacts, as you appreciate, have been significant. Most notably, this part of the river has suffered due to the lack of any kind of collaborative conservation strategy. So our hope is that today, that this might be the first step in trying to rectify that. We'll also be talking about some of the tools that are out there that potentially could play an important role in developing such a conservation strategy. And none of these tools are mutually exclusive in that they could easily be used in combination. For example, among these tools are Indigenous Protected and Conservation Areas, or IPCAs, that you'll hear about shortly from Les Bogdan. There is incredible potential here, and the Canadian government has vowed a significant financial commitment towards this in the coming decade. And as the most recent example, just this past December, the Mamalilakula Nation declared IPCA status for the Lull Bay, Hoya Sound area, and Knight Inlet, and I thought that was great news. Also, with my World Rivers Day affiliation, we do work with other First Nations, both in Canada and elsewhere, who are also rewriting the narrative and exploring a diversity of interesting options as well. For example, the Innu Nation, along with the local county municipality, have jointly moved to designate the Magpie as the first river in Canada to enjoy the rights of legal personhood. And that got a lot of play in Quebec, and it has since gotten a lot of play across the country. As part of that, they've assigned the river a whole series of rights, and similar events as part of the Rights of Nature movement have now taken root in 10 different countries. As still another interesting example, I was in Montana recently, and the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes passed a cultural waterways ordinance for the Lower Flathead River, aimed at, quote, preserving the resources and river conditions necessary for the continuance of cultural practices. These have all been groundbreaking initiatives, and in British Columbia, it has been especially exciting to see how IPCAs are evolving. Now, there are also many other pertinent tools that the various parties with us today will discuss, and these have great potential for the heart of the Fraser as well. For instance, the province could explore the use of options like Land Act reserves, or in concert with the nations of the heart of the Fraser, it could look at establishing wildlife management areas. This was an option that was first put forward for the Fraser lowlands back in the 1990s. And there's a lot of interest on this front. And this is something that Scott Barrett will be speaking to a little bit later. For the federal government, there are still other tools they could explore, such as ecologically significant areas that Bruce Runciman will talk about in his presentation. This is a relatively new designation under the Fisheries Act that is yet to be used. But when this designation can be utilized, I could not think of a better inaugural candidate anywhere in our country than the heart of the Fraser. In addition to these kinds of designations, other tools include habitat restoration possibilities, as Ian mentioned, along with the need to address some fish passage issues, including non-passable floodgates that Lena will talk about a little later. Some good projects have already been undertaken on the restoration front, but there's certainly potential to do much more. Also in the tool basket is the potential to acquire lands for conservation purposes. For example, the Nature Trust of BC, who's also on this call, they've done great work in past in acquiring areas like the Harrison Knob in concert with the Skalitz Nation. And that's that beautiful knob right at the confluence of the Harrison and the Fraser. They've also helped to protect other areas within the heart of the Fraser, such as the Tomberry Farm or part of the Nickaman Slough. And lastly, as part of the tool basket, there's also an important role for local and regional governments in trying to further protect key riverside areas. Now, there are probably other tools that we could discuss as well, but the important point is that all of us on this call today have a role to play in terms of better protecting the heart of the Fraser. This area is truly an Eden in our midst. But in light of the many pressures confronting this part of the river, we are at a key juncture in time. There is a sense of immediacy. So my hope is that we can find a way to come together and begin mapping a path forward. And whatever our individual affiliations or perspectives might be, I think we all have shared values that ultimately come back to a healthy and vibrant Fraser River. So I look forward to the workshop, and thank you again for being with us. And I'll now turn things back to Jason and Justine.